arriving. Ian Fleming wrote a very complex character, a character that has been able to be portrayed by many different actors and through several generations, through all times, you know, starting from the Cold War through 9/11. Through all of these episodes in life, James Bond has always been there.
When the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War seemed to be over, many people said to us, well, I guess that's the end of James Bond. But Barbara and I said, well, it seems to me the world is more in need of James Bond than ever.
30 seconds to impact.
In the 60s when Bond started, you know, you had the Cold War, you had the good guys and the bad guys. The villains were very clearly defined. Today, it gets much more complicated. There's not, I would say, a pure villain anymore. The lines become much more blurry between good and bad. And I think that's the interesting part. Is Bond as bad as the villain? Is the villain as good as Bond? It's interesting not to make the villain so cut clear, he's the bad guy.
We all have a dark, very, very dark side, everybody. So it's quite easy sometimes to feel close to the villain. A villain today doesn't have any scars anymore, or a white cat or a metal jaw. And also now, since Casino Royale, there's something different and much more ambiguous, is that the good and the bad are, in fact, inside James Bond himself.
How much do you know about Bond, Camille? Because he's rather a tragic case. His MI6 says he's difficult to control. Nice way of saying that everything he touches seems to wither and die.
Shall we?
Doesn't bode well for you, I'm afraid.
You two do make a charming couple, though. You're both, what's the expression? Damaged goods?
We're doing the promotion, and this photo shoot was for different magazines around the world. After doing a movie and a lot of stunts, you realize how, you know, this is more like a pleasure. The girl that plays in the James Bond movie, I mean, they're always, you know, glamorous, sexy girls. And I'm just very pleased to be part of it now, because it's kind of a, you know, once you did the movie, you stay in history.
You're quite a girl, Pussy.
I'm strictly the outdoor type.
I'd like to think you're not in all of this caper.
Skip it. I'm not interested. Let's go.
What would it take for you to see things my way?
A lot more than you've got.
How do you know?
I don't want to know.
Isn't it customary to grant the condemned man his last request?
You've asked for this.
The implication is, being a Bond girl is one of those bimbos that took one look at Bond and fell flat on her back. And Pussy Galore was a character that I would like to have played in any film. And she certainly wasn't a bimbo. I mean, she was a character in her own right.
There was an attitude of us, I think it was right across the male population in many parts towards women, which is the Bond girl fitted into that, the Bond girl. I mean, those two words themselves could scarcely be used now, and yet you had to sort of cope with that as an inheritance. Now, the one way you coped with it was that wonderful joke at the start in Casino Royale, where instead of Ursula Andress coming out of the sea, you came out of the sea, which that was a good joke.
Well, yeah. I did. It was by accident as much as possible. I mean, don't believe me. I did actually. It was going through my mind when we did it, but where we filmed off the Bahamas, it's just one of those places where there's a sand shelf, and the sand shelf happens to be 3 feet deep. Because the idea is I was supposed to swim in and then sort of float off, but I swim in and stand up, and it just was one of those. And as I did it, I went, "Oh fuck." Here we go. And as soon as I did it, I knew that I didn't realise the repercussions of it. I had no idea that it was going to be sort of as goes. I'd be haunted by it for the rest of my life.
Bond is a romantic. Bond usually is on a mission, which is complicated enough. And he usually ends up meeting an extraordinary woman who either gets in his way or helps him. And it always makes it a lot more complicated for him. When you begin Quantum of Solace, his heart is broken, and he encounters Camille. And they have quite an intensely emotional but brief encounter.
You lost somebody?
I did, yes.
You catch whoever did it?
No, not yet.
Tell me when you do. I'd like to know how it feels.
We should go. You ready?
During pre-production on GoldenEye, Martin Campbell, the director, and Bruce Fierstein, the writer, had decided that they were going to make M a woman. And they came to tell us in great trepidation because they were afraid of what we were going to say. And we actually thought it was a very, very good idea. There's a wonderful kind of chemistry between them. There's an undercurrent of frisson of sexuality about it. She is the only person who can actually tell him what to do.
I read the script and it was very, very funny. I thought it was very witty. And I thought, oh, hello, this is quite a different relationship suddenly you get with him because of being a woman.
You don't like me, Bond. You don't like my methods. You think I'm an accountant. A bean counter, more interested in my numbers than your instincts.
The thought had occurred to me.
Good. Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War. Whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
Point taken.
My husband said how absolutely thrilling living with a Bond woman. Oh, dear. Living with a Bond woman at last. So that's what, you don't call them Bond girls. Oh, I'm very, very glad that you don't call them Bond girls anymore. Because it had had to change then. But it was they were called Bond women before I entered the frame, I think.
Now, having just met you, I wouldn't go as far as calling you a cold-hearted bastard.
No, of course not.
But it wouldn't be a stretch to imagine. You think of women as disposable pleasures rather than meaningful pursuits. So as charming as you are, Mr. Bond, I will be keeping my eye on our government's money and off your perfectly formed house.
You noticed?
Even accountants have imagination. How was your lamb?
Skewered. On sympathizers.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Good evening, Miss Lind.
That's the interesting part about Quantum of Solace. Where do we take Bond? What is the journey we take him on? The Bond films are sort of the crown jewel of British cinema. One has to play into that to a certain degree, and one has to play into the Britishness. That's the whole beauty about Bond. If you don't have that, it loses the charm, and the charm is something what makes Bond Bond.
He must have followed us.
I think he got the point.
It was more instinct than anything that if you were going to go into this world and be this extraordinary character. Somehow you had to let them in on a secret.